for SK to pick it up here. Trying to walk through the smoke, but it's just not going to happen. SK Gaming, second major championship in a row. They are your winners.
Despite Fnatic's best efforts, it goes the distance, it goes all 3 maps, and we have our champions, the best team in the world, Ninjas in Pajamas!
Red touching the bomb, are they going to peek? Holding it now, and there is it. It's just out of Flamey, it's not going to happen. Astralis have won the face at London main. There's no time! He just has to watch that clock tick down! This is it! Na'Vi have taken the major!
So look, I'm going to start where we started on all of the, talking points. Interestingly enough, in 2018, where Astralis were the dominant team by some distance, they still didn't have the best player of the year, which it's not often that happens. Obviously, Simple was the #1 player in that year, but Device was the #2. And so let's talk about Device. Actually, interestingly enough, we haven't really talked about him a lot over the course of this series. So, fantastic 2018, had 7 MVP awards. Obviously, they won almost everything of note in 2018. DreamHack Marseille, ESL Pro League Season 7, ECS Season 5, E-League Premier League, the London Face It Major, Blast Istanbul, IM Chicago, ECS Season 6, ESL Pro League Season 8, and Blast Lisbon. It was and Device absolutely instrumental to all of that success. He had a really impressive, consistent stat line. He had 62.2% of opening duels, won in big events. He was only beaten by Simple. He had an 809 kill to death differential in big events, which again, any year would have been enough to win it.
Bonkers,
but Simple exists, so you deal with that. He was the best CT player. Which is kind of notable to his playing style, right? He had a 1.34 CT rating over the whole course of the year, which is fucking insane. And played 76% of his maps where he had a positive rating, 0.78 kills per round at the major events. 1.22 event playoff rating, #2 in the world again, only behind Simple. And obviously, Device had this fantastic streak of consistency up until this point. For me, I think it kind of gets downplayed a little bit, especially with things, the twists and turns in his recent career. But at that, put it this way, Simple's a phenom. If Simple doesn't exist, we are talking about we're talking about the GOAT is Device, right?
I mean, the resume alone, immediately in the convo, right? Yeah.
I think Device for me took over Olaf Meister as the GOAT once he got some majors under his belt, and then obviously you just can't touch Simple at this point. It's just way too good. But I think the fun thing about Device, even getting away from any individual game style and any stats around him, the best part about Device as an opper is everyone in the world has forgotten that he was once a world-class rifler. Nobody talks about the fact that the beginning of his career, he was one of the best riflers we had in the game. Yeah, he was a beast with the AK-47 on T sides. And when you factor that, I can't think of a single other top rifler that we've had in Counter-Strike that could transition into being an opper to this degree. Nico's the best rifler of all time, the pure rifler of all time. He's never picking up the op and becoming this effective with it. It's actually unheard of that Device is able to make this kind of a swap and have this level of success and this level of a resume and a legacy as an opper.
I have a curious question here. Because we're talking about in that year that Simple was the best player in the world, right? Do you guys think, because obviously Astralis was the best team, you gladly take the trophies, you take the majors, you take the trophies, but do you think that the reason, Astralis being who they were and the way they approached the game held Device back, or do you think it propped him up? Because you could go either way, right? You could say that yeah, look, this guy was a fantastic player, and if he was given more freedom to go balls to the wall and not always save the AWP or not always drop the AWP to pick up the AK in this moment and try some fucking crazy shit like Simple does, right? Like Cold Zero does when we're talking about. He could have done absurd things, or was he able to be this systematic AWPer in these roles because of what was in place from Astralis there? I lean to. Yeah?
Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry, go on, make your point, mate.
I was going to say, I lean more towards the fact that it was unfortunate for him that he like it hurt him to play in that system, right? He could have, like, not in a bad way. Fuck it. Anyway,
No,
you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. First of all, I will say in general, you will notice the tactical Danish teams, their star player never does seem to be able to hit the same stats or like pop off or eye test of all the great, like the Ziwus, the hard carry uber god players. So I do think to some degree, like the system probably does hold you a little bit back from that. Like, look, the problem with this one is obviously that's why he won all those MVPs. Like, Simple was the best player, but his team was winning the tournament. He was the one who was the AWPer with it. He's the one who has the better plus minus differential. Like, those things definitely like helped some part of his career. I know what you mean though, because like on the one hand, I would say if you look actually at even the Kirby lineup of Astralis or when he was in TSM, I think he was a much more like dominant individual player because it was in those teams sort of like you're our star player, get there's resources, kind of do what you want. But I would say to some degree, like part of like, even if it maybe held him back, like pretty soon, I'll give you an example. If he'd have played on a bad Danish team in this era, then on T side of Inferno, he probably does use the AWP. He probably plays selfishly at the back. You just get kills, you get a bunch of exit kills, you play a bit, you'd have more inflated stats. But what did he do on, by the way, Inferno, their best map? He would just pick up an AK on T side. He would actually just say, essentially, I'll just play within the team. And luckily, like Jason said, because he used to be one of the best rifle players, that is even a weakness. Their best map was fucking Inferno and they were gods on T side. So I think what's perfect for me about his career is it's like you could have had maybe a more individually satisfying career and you might have gotten more props. Like, unfortunately, I actually do think that one thing you've seen in the Astralis breakup and him go to NIP was it made people remember he actually was a really good individual player himself. He wasn't just like a product of the Astralis system. He was really good too. But I do think it's like a bit of both, because on the one hand, I think this, if he'd have only been in Simple and Eco positions, he would never have been able to match what they did. So he wouldn't have the same status in his career. But yeah, the problem is people will, I think it's too harsh when they go the other way and go like you would just assist them AWP or something. It's like, mate, there's plenty of AWPers you could put in Astralis. I don't think they do anything like that.
I was gonna say when Chad used the S word, I think it's outrageous that people are as dismissive of Device, and I actually believe, to Chad's point, I think Device is like quite a cerebral player, and he is simply playing the percentages. It's not that he couldn't go more aggressive if he wants to. I mean, remember when he played rifles, he wasn't like some mega defensive rifler. Signature was the popping your head off with the AK. This guy would get in your face. The fact that he changed his play style to be more in line with what made sense. Everything 2018 Astralis do is numbers driven. The utility, it's numbers driven. Those little margins, of being able to do 30 damage around. Sounds like fuck all. Actually, in reality, makes a huge difference to what you're doing. That's a 2-bullet kill all of a sudden, and Device played the percentages because that's what the percentages are what made Astralis great. By
the way, one last thing, because we haven't mentioned it. Like, I just want to make sure we say this if we're talking about his concept. The whole time he was in this Astralis, he had that like problem with his fucking digestive system or whatever, where he was getting wrecked, and it's like he was having times where at tournaments like the food throwing him off or the stress or whatever. If people don't know that this year where he's just racking up MVPs is when he still had that problem. That was a real thing. It's part of why he was going to eventually have to take time off or something. So like mad props also when you think about his like career of being a choker before that to win your period again. Let's take the simple example. You finally got your opportunity to win. Now you could go, but I got injuries. It's like he just fucking manned up and just won all the tournaments, mate.
I actually think that I don't think Device would have. I think he'd still be a good player. I don't think we'd be talking about him as a great player if he wasn't within this Astralis system. To answer your question, I think he would have always been good. I think this team.
He would have been like Cajun B.
Yeah, but I don't think it was. I don't think of it in a bad way where I think like Astralis really like kind of caged him in and limited him, forced him to play within this style. I think it's the way Device thinks about the game. I think it's the way he approached it, which just aligned so much with it. I don't think it was anyone like trying to restrict him. I think this style that they developed and built around Device and around this team just lent itself to the way that Device wanted to play the game to begin with as an AWPer. I think part of the reason why he was so good fundamentally is because he did kind of come from the rifler. He probably had a great understanding of what the annoying thing was about going up against ops. Like what was the hardest part about dueling an op? It's not that he's just peeking into you and taking a head up duel. It's that he's holding an angle and waiting for you to run in, trying to clear 2 different angles at the same time that you have an AWPer at one of the 3 different angles you have to, like I think he just had a very good feel for where to be positioned at the right time. And I think it felt like he was so comfortable in that system that it had to have been partially driven by him himself.
By the way, since obviously we mentioned this on the past one, but I would say another angle that gets mistaken is because people do tend to like the flash and the highlights. I think people do forget, like, this guy might have the craziest floor level performance ever in Counter-Strike history. Like,
yeah, he raised his C game.
Dude, even Simple will have the games where he gets 2 kills. Like, Device, when does he ever have a bad game? You know what I mean? Like, his floor level is ridiculous. So because you don't do as much of the fireworks, people might not remember it. But again, for high level performance, one of the best to ever play, clearly, yeah.
Also, he did a lot of work with like mental coaches as well, and I know like I know again from like talking to Elysian and everything, who's done similar things as Device in that sense. And even if you like just like read like a self improvement book or something, one of the most important factors they always mention is raising your bad game to a certain level. It's not so much increasing your ceiling, it's raising your floor up, and that's what's gonna increase your greatness and your effectiveness to like a huge degree.
Does it really hurt Device's legacy, just as a tangential question, that he was never able to hit #1, like, in any year?
The one thing is this, though. The problem is, you said it earlier. Let's be real. If there's not Simple, he's hit it in 2018. He's instantly got it in 2018. Not even get it in 2019. You know what I mean? Like that's the problem. That's the issue. Is in the past. This is why Simple really is like Neo, who broke the Matrix. Because every other single year, if you win all the MVP awards and all the majors and a major MVP and all the titles and your team's #1 and you're the best hit player on it, you automatically are #1 on the HL TV. Like they wouldn't even be a discussion. So like, unfortunately, Simple happened. Like, otherwise, I agree. Like, Device would have had it in 2018. That would have been the year, clearly.
And to answer that question, just no. Like, and I think because it's Simple, like because he can kind of, it's almost a testament to Simple that it doesn't actually dilute Device's performance at all. But like, I mean, I don't take anything away from Device. I still think Device probably at this point is, in my mind, the second greatest opera we've had in the game. Maybe not like the best, maybe not the most talented. Like, you know, Kenny S and Guardian are going to be up there in that conversation. But in terms of what he was able to do with the op, Device is #2 for me.
You can keep your fucking flicks.
I've got a quick question I want to ask people as well, because like I alluded to, this is a guy who was literally famous for he is the biggest choker and he is the guy you bet your house against and you know he's going to lose. Like, mate, have you ever seen a turnaround like this? Because I think this is one of the craziest transformations in esports history. Because remember, like, that last run when they had won the Starladder Major over like Liquid and those, mate, he was like the most clutch player in the server in those games. Like that's a complete 180 transition after you've already, by the way, reached the top states in the world. I don't think I've ever seen that in esports, mate. That's crazy.
It's probably the most defining factor about Device as an opera over the other legendary operas is just like the guy in like the pressure moments found a way. He like just didn't miss. Like he didn't make mistakes. He didn't like outposition himself. He didn't over peak, didn't over aggress, and he didn't miss. And like, you know, it's so hard to play against that down the stretch.
And here's a thing that might surprise you. It surprised me when I looked this up, because I knew obviously all of this team were in the top 20 for that year. But what threw me was that Glaive was in the top 10.
Yeah.
But he was a beast.
Yeah, he was a monster. He was like the fragging in-game leader of that era. Like just that.
Yeah,
he was like insane.
The numbers, you know, for an IGL, like, I mean, obviously, you know, like they're nothing compared to some of the other players we've talked about today. But, you know, like he had a 1.14 rating in all the big event playoffs. That was 6th in the world overall. 1.18 CT.
Just to put that in context, that means rating. Glaive in big events would frag like someone like Twists does now.
Yeah.
All right, then. Like if you're backing me up with that, I'm probably going to win a lot of these games, I reckon.
Yeah, you know, like just crazy. Like, you know, a 0.70 KPR over the year and a 1.13 rating for the entirety of the year. You know, the fact that he even stepped up his game in the playoffs for an IGL. And, you know, obviously, if you look at the totality of the list, I'm trying to see if there's any other IGLs on there. I don't think there is.
Very rare.
Surely not. Yeah.
Very rare.
I only have like one good example of this. So you guys might be able to help me out a little bit better. But I know, like, just think of the positions that he played on like CT sides of maps. Like, they were not positions that in-game leaders typically play. Like, he was playing in like Con on Nuke, like for outside and inside support. Like he was in the, like, that's a position that like Get Right was playing in for like the first half. That's where you put like your heavy fragger, because he's going to be involved in all the action. He's going to see the most bodies put at him, and Glaive was able to deliver those kinds of high intensity spots.
Yeah, I mean, like he was like a guy that sort of did a lot of heavy lifting, and it's why he added that extra dimension. It wasn't just tactically. Where, by the way, like we'll never really know how much of the Astralis system is Glaive and how much is Zonic, or what percentage we divide it up as. But what we can absolutely measure is in terms of that next evolution. Think about all the teams that have come before. And how everyone kind of like raises the bar. Yeah, like this is the fragging IGL that like you sort of have to have. We kind of had like Fallen can kind of do it, but it's different because he's an AWPer and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But now this is the norm. There was nowhere to hide for IGLs in a post-Glaive landscape, right?
I've got a couple of points on this. One would be like this just actually, I never thought of it this way, but in a mad way, I'm actually sort of glad that collectively, none of them have been too good without each other yet. Like obviously Device hasn't just even played for 8 months. The ones that went to Vitality haven't succeeded yet. And Glaive's obviously had a pretty hard time in Astralis because I will say, sadly, I think by now, if Device and Nip had like gone to the top and won like a major or something, or if the Vitality team had become top 3, people would already have ruined the narratives by now and made it like that. It was just them. The others were all the ones being like that would actually, in some fucked up way, I almost hope either they all collectively succeed at the same time, or like that never happens, because I do think that will ruin this narrative. Then on that point that you're making there about like the Glaive fragging angle, there's even a cool backstory to this that people might forget, which is when Glaive was off in the wilderness and off like out just playing with no-name Danish teams, and he came back. If people remember, they forget this detail. He came back in the heroic team where he was the secondary caller and Snappy was the IGL. Well, what that means is he got his fragging level up, and then when he joined Astralis, there was even that story years later in this Prime era where there was that famous story that said that Zonic sometimes called in the scrims so that Glaive could just frag out. Basically, like whatever they did, they managed to create basically like a super soldier that we've never had as an IGL, because simultaneously he did seem to be the one making the calls, reading the game, but then he also was fragging. Like that is OP. That's like nobody can compete with that.
Yeah.
They were so like them as a team, and Glaive was at the forefront of this, but they were so good that they became villains because they were so good. Remember that towards the end, like they had to play a bit because people just didn't want to watch these guys play because we knew what was going to happen. But Glaive was like the front man of the team as well, right? He was the one doing most of the they actually a lot of them were pretty personable, right? That was one of the things with this squad. Most of them were in front of the camera giving interviews and everything, but that's the
best about Twitter as well, by the way. He had some good Twitter bans.
True. Yeah. I think this team, like with Glaive at the helm, obviously he was a huge factor, right? When you look at where they were and then when he joined and then how everything kind of shifted and changed, he definitely had to have been a huge driving force in this. And when you think about the type of maps they were good on, these are technical maps. It was Inferno and Nuke. And I don't know if my brain's broken or if HLTV's broken or like, I'm just bringing this up again. This roster in 2018 on LAN, on Nuke, were undefeated. 27 wins on Nuke, on LAN in that year. Nobody took a map off. And just so people can make sure, I want to really, really send this one home, because we come from a period of time when Nuke was a 12-3 half, right? And that came with winning pistol on the T side. They started, right? They started T side in the majority of these maps because it was their fucking map choice. Yeah, it is mind-blowing to not lose Nuke on LAN in a year. And we're talking 16-8, 16-7, 16-4. I used to start having to say to Alex, yeah, look, you need to limit them to 6 rounds on the T side.
Yeah, dude, that was crazy. What you're talking about used to be a famous narrative. Exactly. Like what would happen is the other team would be winning like a few CT rounds, and it'd be like, they'd only be on like 4 or 5, but you would realize like the game's already over. Actually, sorry, you've let them have 5 rounds. Like you might not win this one. Like. Yeah, it's like, that's ridiculous. Like that, the joke is what should have fucked them, Chad, which is they have to start on the bad side, because they would sometimes even win the T side. Actually, the other team was mentally broken immediately. They had reversed the dynamic. That's how crazy good they were.
Yeah,
I think there's a cool conversation to have about this Astralis team too, where it was like they almost played, I think before they found success, a lot of the feeling around this team was that they were almost playing like too perfect of Counter-Strike in a way. Like they were playing too textbook. And I always remember a lot of conversation around Astralis before this era really kicked off and got deep into it, was they needed an X factor. And that's like what KRB kind of provided for a brief moment when he came into the team when they won in Atlanta. And then the real person to kind of take this team to the next level, I always felt, was when Magisk came in, because he was that X X Factor who'd played in like kind of the scrappy second tier Danish teams, weren't as tactically prevalent, weren't as tactically polished and strategically in depth. And he kind of came into this team and played really solid, but he also broke out of the textbook once in a while when they needed it. And it was able to like just spin around on its head for a reason that some of them probably wouldn't think of doing, because it doesn't fall into that great, solid, fundamental Counter-Strike realm. And that X Factor, just that extra angle of having someone like Magisk who could do things like that was so impressive.
Well, here's a fun
So,
stat for you,
sorry, go
Jason. Oh, just to throw this in, it'll probably
Yeah, go
supplement
on.
your point. He was, that KAST, whatever the fuck the
Kill
impact
assist,
stat.
kill assist.
Yeah.
Survive, trade, or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So he was number 2 in the world for that Magisk that year, 2018.
Oh, makes sense.
He was
Yeah.
just behind Simple with 74.5%, kill assist or survive or traded. Yeah.
That's
So, I
another
mean,
thing I think
wild.
made this
That's
team
disgusting.
OP. Because think about all these players we're discussing. Like, obviously, we've got like Glaives, the IGL fragging, Device not. Then for Magisk, you already remember Astralis was a really good team before Magisk. You add in to already a really good CT team, probably one of the best like lockdown fucking CT players of all time.
Bomb
Like,
site anchors.
almost
Yeah.
every single clip you think of in your brain of Magisk is him just literally killing 3 people who come into like his crosshair. Like, this is the guy with money to do that. So you add that in as well. That means, by the way, even if you correctly like use utility to distract him, you get a kill on the other side, you pull them over, you go there, he just kills you all like that. Now that's why you can't beat a team like this. A player like that can just act, like just make up for mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, look, I want to do a bit of a head-to-head between the two lineups. Obviously, we're talking a lot about Astralis and they're kind of like flawless.
Haven't even
you
mentioned Xipix yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we'll come back. We'll come in. We can circle back round. But the obviously in terms of the lineups, I mean, like I felt you wouldn't see a core as good as the Fnatic from 2015 ever again until the Astralis 2018 happened. I even think arguably the Kiebi lineup, I think you could probably maybe like go back and forth on that one a little bit. But yeah, absolutely. Like Magisk, he was earmarked as a prospect back when, like, as I said, Dignitas and SK, like everybody knew he was good. Everyone was talking about this guy. And so let's do it. I want to compare the two lineups and see if there's any area where Fnatic have an edge.
Well, the
Oh,
funny thing is,
I think they will.
I think it's going to be the other way around. I actually think what you're going to find is I think Fnatic will have the edge in the direct matchups, but then at the end somehow we'll decide Astralis was the better team. Isn't that sort of the way most people's bread spotted?
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, well, we'll get the AWPers out the way. There is no competition between JW and Device, right?
No, Device wins that one. Come on.
Yeah, so we're all right there. But let's say,
let's. I want to.
They're different types of AWPers.
Yeah, because I was gonna
Yeah.
say, like, I think we're always gonna give the heads up to Device, but like the things that JW brought to the Fnatic team and like the way he introduced chaos,
creativity.
around it,
It's
yeah.
polar opposite as well, aren't they? In terms of
Yeah,
style.
they
Yeah,
are. They're
exactly.
exact opposite
Yes.
uppers. So I think it's just a different style of impact, but you take Device every single day, hands down.
Yeah, I
Yes.
agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I think like JW, you look at the way that he would come up with these aggressive plays and then having to like tweak them, or whereas Device, he didn't need those type of plays. He
Yes.
had his different ways of being able to apply that trade. But when you think about an AWPer, as much as it's cool to get all those flashy plays and to get the flicks and to have all that sick up close and put, I will take an AWPer like Device every day of the week. It's not even a question. Like you wanting to win a game of Counter-Strike, you want to play a like Device, and that's Device.
the
head and
sad
shoulders.
thing about like what's happened with Device's career now is that I feel that this year would have been really good for his game. Like if he'd just been in the team.
Sure. Yeah.
It's super sad, but let's compare the IGLs as well, because I think this is a no-brainer. I feel like Pronax was the last of the non-fragging IGLs. I know he thought of himself as a frag, like he wasn't. Like, I mean, you can go look at the numbers. He was just really good at what he did. But I mean, it's like even when Fnatic were big, it's a sea of red if you go look at
I mean, he was maybe a fragging in-game leader in the era of existence, still playing the game of Counter-Strike. Like, cool.
It's the difference. Glaive actually won MVPs, mate. Like, there's no universe where Pronax was going to win an MVP in Fnatic. Like, there's no offense to that. It's just the way the team was.
Again, when I was like looking this up, there was some really bad games fragging wise for Pronax, but in series that they won, You know, and like he did have a number of notable games where he couldn't like get into double figures, like somewhere he had like, you know, 2 kills, 4 kills. It was rough. But so for me, again, head to head, I think Pronax is super underrated tactically as an IGL. I think it's just a sad reality of the fact he got to play with one of the greatest cores and somebody else come along after him and kept on winning and all of that stuff. But undoubtedly for me, Glaive is the evolution of the modern IGL. So I think head to head, Glaive wins out.
Glaive would have to be like the greatest in-game leader of all time, right? Like with 4 majors, with the streaks on maps defining the way that they were played and are still essentially played today. That's huge. I think the thing that I consider back when I'm thinking about Pronax in that time, and you look at some of those in the stats, right? When you go, okay, yeah, Pronax, he was really struggling with these stats. Like let's as an example, and everybody else was fragging. What people don't understand with this is the person coming up with the solution is, especially back then, is the in-game leader. Everybody else pretty much did as they were told or as they were instructed to do with the rounds. So if you found yourself in a position where you were having to overcome something that you hadn't experienced before, it actually isn't easy to be thinking about the mid round and the micro while calling the bigger picture and still focusing on your crosshair. Like that was really hard. That was actually really hard to do. And I know that Counter-Strike back then was a bit quicker. So, you know, if kills were coming his way, those are the ones as an in-game leader you should be converting. But on the T side, as you're trying to piece a round together against something that, like, as I mentioned, maybe you haven't seen before, it's a different play style or something, it's fucking hard. Like, people don't give that enough respect. Like, it is actually really difficult because your players were more like meatheads back then. They were weapons for you. They were, how do I use my weapon? Now, your weapon has a brain. Your weapon can actually, give you key information or make the decision for you as an in-game leader. Now, as an in-game leader, I think, especially at the highest level, the brains of the 4 teammates around you were probably like what the brains of the in-game leaders were back then, right? So that's the evolution of this. It was fucking difficult to have to make decisions for yourself and for other people in the bigger picture of how you want to approach the game and going against the constantly changing puzzle of the opponent. So look, definitely giving it to Glaive, but that's one of the things that goes overlooked. People don't get it. Like too many people just look at the numbers, unfortunately, and you got to take it in a bit of like isolation, I think.
And also, Glaive had Zonic.
Yeah.
Just throw that in there.
Yeah.
And also, Pronax had JW, so imagine trying to come up with a plan and then your star opera just jumps out of a fucking window.
Yeah, exactly. So here's interesting. Who do we compare Zipnix to? Do you Flusher or Crims?
Oh, that's interesting because obviously that's what's weird about Fnatic, isn't it? They weren't sort of just setting the roles. Yeah.
I think it would have to.
Probably should be Flusher. I think
I was
to me
say
it was
Flusher.
yeah.
I think it'd be yeah.
So
Korean Crims.
Now, Zipnix was only 13th in the top 20 and was the lowest ranked Astralis player, obviously.
Only 13th.
I know, only 13th in the world. But, I mean, he still had some notable stats. For example, he was the most survivingist player. He just didn't die in rounds.
Also, is that, wait a second, 1 second. Is this a new thing? Do you just call him Zipex now? Why did you do that, Jason? Don't you call him Zipnix as well? Have I missed something? Did he? No. Was there a meeting? I thought you called him Zipnix like all the rest of them.
I did call him Zipnix, but all the new talent on the broadcast call him Zipex.
Oh,
they didn't stick up with it. So now I'm like the fucking asshole on the broadcast, the only one saying Zipnix,
right,
I'm getting all the tweets directed at me.
The peer pressure.
Don't you fucking realize his name is Zipex? And I'm like, man, I've been casting this. I've gone through this controversy like 7 times. Come on.
By the way, that would also be the ultimate CSGO community move to retcon and gaslight us all that he was never called Zipnix by any of us. Even though, by the way, it's on video. Like we've got all the. What do you want? Like,
I also, while we're just on that point,
so
Jack, tell Alex to start calling Ziwu instead of Zywoo, because every time someone says Ziwu, which is how the French pronounce it and how he pronounces it, they all do the meme of the Chinese pictograms as if you've got the fucking name wrong, and it is Ziwu anyway.
But I asked MBK. Yeah, this is the thing we tried. But look, I'll make a note.
MBK, he's sabotaging the French scene again.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just
let me make a note.
Anyway, so Zipnix, He was the most survivingist player, which isn't like a particularly big deal, but he survived in something like 42% of the rounds. He had 0.57 deaths per round, so that's all good.
But he's even survived in Astralis the longest thus far.
I know. Which, but by the way, we can also sort of joke about how horrible it was, but he is absolutely getting a massive.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, whatever.
I know.
But anyway,
Exactly. I don't feel so sorry for him, believe it or not, Richard.
No,
Exactly.
I didn't think so. So he had 77 clutches in big events, which makes him the number one for 2018. This was when he wasn't, he might not post the biggest stats, but he was one of the most reliable clutches in the world. So when I compare him to Flusher, very hard, but I might give 2015. I think I will give 2015 Flusher the edge on that one, right?
Oh,
my problem is this: if you're only going on like pure support play, maybe clutch rounds, so maybe Zipnix can edge it. But the problem with that is for me as well is that's why I say the Fnatic one's a bit wacky for roles. Flusher obviously could be a way more overall impactful player, I think, and have much bigger games and frag out more.
I would say one thing that I think gets underrated about Zipix, and it's probably just because he's so good in clutches that we focus on that for good reason. But he was a player that I always used to love watching as a defender on bomb sites. The way he played like the inner bomb site on Train, which was one of the hardest bomb sites to be like that anchor defender for a while. When they played it way back in the day, he played the B bomb site at Mirage, and I remember just like I always have these like glimpses in my brain of Zipix on the CT side, like just playing those situations so calculated, like knowing exactly where he's going to fall back based off what's coming at him, like where he's going to step into, what corner he's going to play, and how he shifts when his teammate is rotating over. He had a really good sense, even like during executes, of how to play bomb sites depending on where his teammate was positioned. I always thought he was like really, really gifted in that sense as well, and it gets overlooked frequently. For this one, I think, yeah, comparing head-to-head roles is really tough. I'd give it to Flusha, just like Duncan said, for his overall impact on the game is actually so mental.
I agree. I think overall, Flusher for sure in this comparison.
So Dupree versus Olaf?
Bloody hell, they're odd. This is the thing. It's so hard to do these like head-to-heads, right? When you start comparing all these bits and bobs. Yeah, but then unfortunately for Dupree, like you would just have to give it to Olaf because he was the best player at the time. Like that's not even a conversation. Like Dupree, bloody brilliant in the entry roles, and once Kirby went, he got a couple of the spots back and a bit more space. And you can think about how influential he was. You remember the highlights with him with the Deagles, sure, but you compare it to Olaf. This is probably the one where it's just unfortunate that Dupree got matched up against Olaf, right? And someone had to be, but Olaf has to take the cake here. I don't think there can be too much of a discussion.
No doubt.
Just to throw something in there for Dupree, because I think people probably do forget what a fantastic entry fragger he was. Remember this year, like Simple was the number one for opening duels with something like 66%. Then it was Device with like 64 or whatever I said earlier. Now keep in mind, obviously they're using AWPs, right? Well, Dupree was only the 5th for T-side opening duels, but it was 49.7% with a rifle. Were
there any other riflers in the top 5?
I would probably say, I think Nico was above him.
Okay,
but I don't have it in front of me.
Even that alone would be pretty good confident being probably the best rifle player in the history of Counter-Strike. So
I mean, the 58.8% for Nico, it says here. So I mean, the company Dupree was keeping there though is like fucking insane.
Also remember stylistically, if you think about Dupree as an entry fragger versus obviously the Opper's an easy contrast there with how they go for picks, but even like Nico is not like the grimy entry fragger on like an execute coming in with utility. He's kind of waiting for an isolated 1v1. He's looking for like a mid-range fight with his AK-47. So completely different stylistically. Yeah, Dupree coming in on entries for Astralis. I mean, Chad outlined it earlier, like the executes, the details that go into it. Like Dupree was just so good in this position of knowing where he's going and having, obviously, with the tactics set up behind him, knowing where to look, which spots to clear first based off which flashbangs are popping off. And like his ability to thrive in that chaos was huge. And I think statistically against Olaf as well, he probably gets beat up a little bit because his entire job was to get one kill. It was just to get one kill, to get that first kill, and that's it.
By the way, that's even a bit, I think, underrated as well. The other problem with the Astralis thing is because it looks like this beautiful clockwork thing that fits together, it makes people, this is a flaw you've noticed. It's obviously the famous thing about magicians, that you never tell people the way you do the trick, you just let them see the surface of it. Unfortunately, when things make sense to people, it also makes them think, well, that's easy then. No, understanding something's not the same as it being easy. So I think there's loads of players, by the way, just like they think with Device, I think they think the same with Dupree. Like, it'd be a dream to be an entry fragger in this team. It's like, no, that, you know what, it would, because you've got a great team with you. It'd be really hard though. Like he's just saying, and the analogy here would be, it's the difference between being like a superstar wide receiver in the NFL, where you just do whatever you want and they throw you the ball, or you have to run the exact route for that quarterback, and he's only going to put it on that exact spot on the field, and if you're like a step off, it's going to miss you. Like, it's actually really hard to do what Dupree did. I bet there's like sense of like, because remember, half of entry fragging as well is like the unknown. You don't know where they're going to be, but at the same time, you're remembering your route, the flashes, you're making space for this guy. Oh, I bet you, I think it's one of the most underrated jobs you'll see, because again, it's going to look like the team just did it collectively, isn't it?
I think in general, like, he's super underrated. I think the problem with the Astralis legacy is actually all of the the players will never sort of get the props as they do individually, and it's kind of fucked up, because actually it's probably the weakest player out of the bunch that gets the most plaudits, because it's the clutch minister. He even gets a super cool nickname, right?
Yes.
You don't give a super cool nickname to Mr. Consistent Device. I mean, I like the Tom Brady of CSGO kind of angle.
Tim Duncan for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and
giraffe, whatever. Just all the same stuff, whatever. Just saying stuff, whatever.
Why? Why kick him when he's down as well? Like, why now, Duncan? But for me, it's like, these players like are kind of like underrated individually in a way. I feel like Dupree is definitely a guy who suffers from that. Much better rifler than people.
Him and Device were like the double D combo for that was the main talking point about those old TSM rosters, is the double Ds of those guys being like a 1-2 punch with the AKs.
Yeah, exactly. And, very, he got to keep that style while Device had to evolve. So, this team could work. The final head-to-head, our boy Magisk that we were just talking about, Tomato, I believe is his nickname in the pro scene, because he gets red when he plays, versus Crims. And I think this is
It's an
interesting one.
It's the hardest one out of the lot.
Okay.
I've never even thought about this head-to-head. Holy shit.
Okay.
Yeah, this is hard. I mean, they some
good similarities, though, I think, with some of those.
Yeah, I was going to say there is some role overlap between these two guys. I mean, it's just obviously, again, you have to think about them where they are. So this is 2018 Magisk versus 2015 Crims, and it is a super tough one. Again, even with all of my bias, I kind of maybe could lean towards Magisk on this one. I think like his impact was so clear on the identity of the team, the fact that they suddenly had somebody who wasn't who wasn't temperamental, but also could be improvisational. Like Kjaerbye could be improvisational, but everything about Kjaerbye, like towards the end of his tenure in Astralis, it was like everything about him was kind of like summed up by his play style. It was like he an almost lack of focus, wild inconsistency, very used to get very frustrated. He was like an aberration in a team where everything else was so clinical. And Magisk, for me, is like exactly what you want. It's like he is like calm under pressure, but passionate, but it simmers below the surface, and also, like I say, is capable of pulling out those individual moments and adding a little bit of an X factor to a team that really was very system focused. So I could certainly lean towards Magisk on this one, even though I think Crims is one of the great.
Problem with that one for me is I think the divide is like, I would say like the raw peak of Magisk is higher, and like individual tournaments he probably was an MVP and obviously deserved those at times when he was. Whereas like to me, the thing about Crims that's insane is I think he is one of the greatest like jack of all trades ever to play Counter-Strike. Like he could be the bomb site anchor on CT. He could be the guy who fucking is like a rotate if you want. He could be the an entry player for you. Like he can close the rounds and win the clutches. He can entry, like he can do everything basically. Like, so to me, I find it hard. I sort of slightly edge to Crims, but I think some of that's bias.
They were both ranked 7th as well in the world in their respective years. Just to make it even more difficult to divide them. But okay, so here's maybe something in the Crims column. He had 2 MVP performances, including that Tours tournament that was the resurgent starting point we talked about in the previous round. Whereas Magisk only managed 1.
Yeah, and they both had a tough time grabbing MVPs where they could with the teammates around them as well.
I don't know. Can we have a tie?
I find myself really wanting to make a case for Magisk, but I don't think I can pick against Crims, and I don't really know how to consolidate that.
But it's also hard with what Duncan was just saying. That both of these players seem like they would with Magisk coming in from where he was, right? Remember, it was all the tiers and everything, and then into this team, which worked perfectly for him. He was going to do everything anyway. And Crims was already that type of guy, right? Even when he was on LGB, he was other than playing connector, which is the only position I'm sure that he would have a hard time giving up, and probably still to this day, right? I know he's not playing there anymore, but they were both out of all the comparisons, this is the most similar, I think, right? In terms of what they brought to their teams.
I've got a great angle for you. You know what? When I think about this angle, I think Crims is a player who could play in Astralis if he was Danish.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be a backup player for them. I think they'd make use of him. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. I think you could say that about a few, almost all of them in a way. Not JW. I feel he's way too erratic. I don't think Glaive could never put the shackles on him. It just wouldn't work, right? So we can discount JW, not because of his skill ceiling or where he was at his peak, but just because his play style was.
It's anathema to their style. If they're playing by the numbers, it doesn't make sense to gamble like JW style, of course, yeah.
But, Olaf would fit in there. Crims definitely would fit in there. You could see it. I always feel
good point, actually. I think Olaf would be sick, because imagine the damage one Swedish blonde could do to some of these. In the context of CSGO, of course.
Yeah, of course. Perfect. Within the context of CSGO. But no, I feel like the thing that I always feel about the 2015 Fnatic, why I rate them so highly is I think they are like a proto Astralis. I just think they essentially took a formula that worked and just updated it, just like a firmware update for the modern era, essentially. So it's very hard on the head-to-head,
Yeah, that one's tough.
Astralis have more intangibles, I want to say, as well. You think about some of the series, like Duncan said earlier, where they just did not fucking lose. And it made no sense. They looked done. They were on the ropes. They had to get 6-7 rounds in a row on a T side of a map that's heavily CT favored. And they would do it, and they would take it to overtime, and then they would win. Do
you know what I think is the most bullshit thing that we put on people in history? It is the Team Liquid 2018 one, because we go, you guys fucking sucked. You couldn't even beat Astralis. Oh wait, no one in history could ever beat. That's every other team it counts for too. The difference is they didn't have to play them. They were in different years. You know what I mean? At the end of this, by the way, the joke is, at the end of it, if Astralis wins, which I assume they do, actually Team Liquid starts looking way better, don't they?
Yeah.
They actually get boosts their stock to some degree.
Yeah, I feel for the Team Liquid guys. I really do, because it's like in a lot of sports. If you just play in the era of Jordan's Bulls, I think about that. This is obviously from my era, but think about being that Utah Jazz team.
Stockton and Malone.
Yeah, Stockton and Malone. Imagine that as a pairing. And what, we get nothing. All right, okay, cool, brilliant. It's one of them. It's unfortunately, Astralis were just so fucking good at what they did, and literally, there was. I think there's an interesting parallel between the two teams, because what Fnatic would do, Fnatic were disliked because they were abusers. They found bugs and they would abuse them. They found guns and they would abuse them. Tech 9, CZs, here's a boost, here's this, here's that. People fucking hated that shit because it looked gimmicky, but it was their way of playing the percentages. Astralis just found a way to do it with things that it wasn't abuse. It was shit that was in the game. It's just people never fucking paid any attention to it. People never really went deep in the fucking utility until Astralis came on.
One thing I don't think we even mentioned this much on past episodes, so I'll quickly bring it up now. One thing that they also changed did Astralis, but when I say changed, it was only them that did it. Mate, Chad, their buying patterns were nothing like the past 5 years before. In fact, the Fnatic teams and the envies of this era in 2015 set the era that every team, it's why Yanko to this day purports, it's all about like, you do like the gamble force buy and you do the one where it's like, right, this one guy's the hero kit. They were never doing that in Astralis. They were doing like the most pure, like if you were an IGL, basically it's like the dream of what you want. All the players really do save. They never buy like that fucking stupid shotgun to even the money out. Like they did, it was the coach's dream, right?
Yeah, they were playing it like how the transition happened when you came from Source 1.6 to this game, right? And it was hard ecos. It was like, okay, maybe we get a deagle, right? That if you got the plant on pistol, maybe you get a deagle. But when I came, I was a purist, and that's the way you used to do it when you're a purist. You would take the hard ecos and you fucking stomach the hard ecos, and they brought ecos back in a way. Then I think when they realized how good they were, they stopped doing that because they could even win on those type of rounds. But yeah, in the height of their powers, they weren't fucking around. It didn't matter to them that they'd already won that first half pretty strongly. It's like, we lose the pistol, let's take the eco, let's get ourselves in a strong position just to close this down. Let's not take the risk. Let's not have those extra variables. Whereas where we find ourselves modern day, it feels like everybody's back.
Oh, it's wild, isn't it?
Back you fucking see a menagerie of guns come out now. It is fucking crazy.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I think certainly the spirit of Fnatic kind of lives on in that sense. That people will look to find the optimal guns. But like for me, I think Astralis just always found a way to make something work. And some of the rounds that they won in big games were like little gimmicky plays or big ball calls or, force buys from nowhere. They in 2018 they really did things that you just couldn't believe. Everyone talks about the system. They did have some incredible flashes as well, for sure.
Yeah, but you could say the same thing about 2015 Fnatic. I mean, they're like, it might not have been as pretty, but they won rounds like that you weren't even supposed to win, where there wasn't even supposed to be an actual, even just a puncher's chance of winning a round. They would just pull it out of nowhere. I remember. I mean, I think we probably all remember at least one, but they did it so many times you can't even list them all. I'm thinking of one they did against Navi on Mirage in the Pro League Season 2 finals of just Tech 9 stuck in the B halls, and all of a sudden they blow up and pop out against a full buy in like round 29 and win it, and then go on to win the map. And it's like they just had rounds like that too. Barcelona, I think they called a timeout and won an incredible round to come back in the finals. And they asked Flusher, like, what did you guys talk about during this timeout? And he goes, we didn't really have a plan. We just said, Olaf, go kill. Yeah. Like Olaf went and killed. They just win rounds that just don't make any sense either. So they had that same kind of tendency in a vastly different way.
So unless I'm missing anything, I guess any final points before we get to the ultimate vote and end time travel LAN for another 10 years? Anyone? I feel like Chad has barely spoken. He's our resident pro.
I've had my bits. I don't know. I'm just waiting for the lights to go off again. No, I don't know. I just think before we get to this vote, comparing these two teams, it's hard. It's a hard comparison, right? It's kind of fun. It's hard comparing anybody to Astralis, because, like I said before, like once they got to the point where people were bored watching them, that's when you know how good they are, right? They basically, and
sure.
I think that this team was able to. And this wasn't during the online era, right? Because you saw teams during the online era start refining more and more of what Astralis had already done. They had done this during the same bullshit that everybody else was already a part of. It was LAN event after LAN event, plane to plane, and they somehow, in the madness of all of this, sat down as a team, decided this is how they were going to approach the game, and came up with this. And these 6 individuals, you have to include the coach in this, Zonic in this, became the greatest team of all time. It's like, nobody, it hasn't even been that long, really. What are we now? 4 years since. Yeah. So we're looking at a team who changed the course of Counter-Strike for the better, because the game that we get now, this is how it was probably always meant to be played, right? Where we are right now, like just how refined and how detailed. And not only did they bring, the geekiness to the game, they brought strong individuals, right? They brought all the best parts of Counter-Strike and they put it in this fucking mixing pot. And they just showed us something that was amazing. Like it was, we're in awe. We would start to go to events and it was like, yeah, well, why are we even fucking here? We know Astralis is going to win.
It got boring for us to talk about on the broadcast as well.
This team, it's just, yeah, they're undeniable.
Here's what I would say, because I actually think it's so fitting these are the two teams that are in this final, not just because they're the 1 and 2 and the greatest teams of all time, but I actually think what an amazing contrast. Like, the joke is, if you really could get a time machine, this is the match you put together.
Oh,
like, this is, like, you know, this is styles make fights in the UFC. This is the dream, mate, because what's amazing about these two teams is I absolutely could, even though I might end up picking a straw, I could go either way on this one for real, because if I think of the teams at their strengths, I actually can find a way in which both would beat the other. Like, for example, if there was ever a team that could have had a chance to upset the Astralis 2018 team and beat them and get it is this Fnatic team. They're the most clutch team ever. They are the team where every player can, in a different way, go off in the game and in different maps. And, you know, you never know who the hero's going to be. They don't have a set positions, etc. Meanwhile, Astralis, same thing. So no one can beat the super clutch Fnatic, right? They always come through in the end. Well, if any team could, it'd be the team that's boring and round by round does the right move every single time. Always, even if JW does a crazy round, we do the ecos, then we come back with the proper buy, we execute. Like, both of these teams, that's why, in a way, I want the time machine. I want to see who would win, because I can make the case that either would be the one that would be the kryptonite to the other. It's actually, I think it's the perfect matchup in some ways.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you know, there were like some little tantalizing glimpses, but unfortunately, just because of the nature of time and when everyone hit their peaks, you never kind of got, you know, this 5 versus that 5 in any meaningful capacity. And so, you know, it's very hard. I'm a super fanboy of the Fnatic team of 2015. You know, they were a game changer when they came along. But obviously, like 2018 Astralis, I think Chad hit the nail on the head. They basically showed you, listen, you bums, this is how Counter-Strike could have been played the whole time. You could have all been doing this. You could have all took it this serious. The tools were all there, and everyone was kind of like a little bit fucking embarrassed by them. I feel like, you know, you had to suddenly, like, put it this way: every IGL out there, every analyst, every coach. Did anyone download anyone else's demos apart from like Astralis, unless you had a reason to? You just went and watched what they were doing. And they, I mean, in a real sense, not like a metaphorical sense, everyone raised their game. No, Glaive and Zonic essentially educated everyone from 2018 onwards in CS, because everyone watched what they were doing and emulated it for the success. And there's not many teams you can say that about in history, in any esport, in any sport. So, I mean, for me, I think, you know, Astralis, and obviously this is edging into the vote. I do think Astralis, like, this isn't like a contentious, you know, GOAT status that's conferred upon them. They really did amazing things for the game.
By the way, what you're saying there, where you contrast the styles, that's even another thing I think personally goes in the column for Astralis. I do think Fnatic 2015 was the most influential team ever in the history of Counter-Strike. I think that's nearly how most teams and star players especially fuck heavy with that style. Like, spoiler, think of all those stories you've heard of who Nico wanted as his IGLs. Pronax, fucking Flusher. He even later wanted Golden. It's like he just wants to play that style. That's clearly how he sees Counter-Strike. A lot of star players are like that. Here's the difference, though. I agree, Richard. Tons of teams tried to download those Astralis demos and play like that. And I tell you what, it's fucking really hard. Like, I would say that is the hardest style to emulate. I don't think anyone's ever come even close. Like, the closest ever for me, this is one of the reasons I always thought when they're on LAN they were disappointing, was that Gambit team last year. And spoiler, I think that's just because online, their coach could talk the entire time. It was like having a 6th player in the game. If that's what it takes to emulate Astralis, like, you can see no one's going to do it. Like, have as many years as you want. No one's going to play like that style and perfectly conquer the tactical game and win like this. Like, that's probably the most impossible to replicate style of all time.
Jason, last point, and then we'll put it up to the vote.
I think just to give some attention over to the Fnatic roster as well. I would actually disagree that the Astralis style is the hardest one and most effective. I think the Fnatic style is probably the hardest one to actually pull off with the way they did, in terms of how good they were on the same page. Remember, we talked so much at the time of the Fnatic hive mind, where they somehow were just all on the same page, all making plays at the same exact time in situations where it didn't feel like you could possibly coordinate it. And that's such a hard style, because you're like riding that line. Like, if you go too far, too loose, like, you are going to fall off the edge and it's going to look like a complete disaster. I think that kind of a peak that it's able to get when you have those individuals with the level of freedom that they were having, and like the level of just ability to just make the play that they wanted. Obviously with those players, it worked perfectly. I think stylistically, I think Fnatic probably had the higher peak in their style, but there's certainly less consistency to it.
No, we've got to do it. You know what? The good thing about sort of having this, like, look back and walk down memory lane is remembering how good some of these teams were. Like, you know, I'd actually looked up a lot of stuff for the 2015 Fnatic team, and they'd kind of faded a little bit in my memory, even though I remember being really, you know, like fond of them as a team and really fanboying them. I'd forgotten just sort of how good they are, but equally, very hard for me to look beyond Astralis as the 2018 as the greatest team of all time. I think they essentially gave birth to the modern era that we're kind of like living through now. And the modern era, don't get me wrong, it's been fucking strange. You know, we've had pandemics and a return to online, the emergence of prodigious talent. We've had eras denied because of geopolitical events. It's been, you know, in a way, you kind of look back at 2018 with a fondness now because the world has been so fucking crazy since then. But yeah, for me, Astralis, they're the greatest, hands down, just in terms of what they did. But man alive, I agree with Duncan. I would have loved to have seen this match. If there was any way to construct it, I would love to see it.
Give it a few more years, we'll be there. We'll have the technology.
Well, the retirement circuit that we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I still think the idea, by the way, after we finish this series, to do the bot major version. I'm gonna do it probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see how it works out. So,
Okay.
But anyway, that's my vote. Astralis 2018.
Yep, I'm going to echo that. I'm going to echo that wholeheartedly here. I was really fond of watching this team play in their peak, and I've said it enough. This is the team who have put us down the path where we are today, and without them, without that domination, I don't think, you know, Counter-Strike would be as exciting for me to watch as it is. So yeah, for me, Astralis 2018, no doubt about it.
I'm taking Fnatic 2015 in this
Get
one.
the fuck out of here,
edgy,
Jason.
edgy. All right.
I'm taking Fnatic 2015 in this one.
Fucking hell.
I think
Listen,
this is...
I know they did a lot of damage to Liquid, but give them their fucking props, Moses. What the fuck? This is your final last dagger at the end, isn't it? Like, I'll get revenge for Elise.
This is for you.
No.
No, I think like kind of Richard said is the one. I think we kind of forget sometimes the power of like what these Fnatic players were able to bring out. Like, I think in my mind, I don't think anyone comes close to anything we've seen Simple does ever in Counter-Strike except for Olaf in 2015. I don't think people realize fully how straight up dominant he was as an individual player in 2015. And I think you put him back on the map with that 2015 level. I think he's gonna be single-handedly winning you a number of rounds, but just his ability to like kind of duel and find openings, I think would be something special. I think you add in, you know, this Fnatic team felt like a team that was made to break the unbreakable rosters. They're the only team that we've talked about who's like successfully been able to stop the plow when it's gotten to like its full momentum period with VP back in the day. They had all the factors. They had the same clutch ability with Flusha taking on Zipex. Those two players were absolutely insane. They're some of the standout players at majors, at big events in the entire history of Counter-Strike. Like, these guys were undeniably unbelievable, and notoriously one of the hardest teams to prep for in any sense back then. Like, nobody knew how to play against them and how to plan against them because you simply couldn't do it because it was so much on individual intuition that there wasn't consistency in all the time in what Fnatic did. So I think this team and their ability to just pull around out of absolutely nothing for no good reason whatsoever, I think you combine that with the players they had, I think this team would beat the 2018 Astralis.
Like I said, I do think like I can make a case where Fnatic would. I do think this is like justifiably the hardest one, but I would take Astralis. The main reasons why, obviously, we waxed lyrical about the tactics and stuff. I do think it's fundamental aspect. This is maybe where me and Jason disagree. I agree. Like, obviously, nobody can be the way Fnatic was because they had such a unique cast of players. But the difference is, I actually think like proper tactical Counter-Strike is the hardest to execute for exactly the reason that you have to do things like execute and have protocols, and everyone has to be on the same page. You have to understand what to do. You have to understand where the round breaks down. It's so difficult to do that and actually be at the number one level, in my opinion. And then I'll throw in as well, they're the only team out of all the ones that are going deep in this bracket where they don't have the best player in the world. They don't have the guy where it's like he might just win the game by itself for you. That's the one thing Device doesn't do. Like, he's a really amazing player, but he doesn't go like, right, we're getting wrecked in this game, so everyone on my back, like, break those system. Like, they beat the teams that do that. They go against the Simple. Like, it doesn't matter, they win. So the problem is basically, like I said, for me, the Fnatic ones are almost more on like an urban legend thing. Like, how could they ever lose? The Astralis ones, it's almost like I feel like I've mathematically solved an equation. Like, Astralis equals the best team ever. Like, it just makes perfect sense. So I have to go with Astralis for this one.
So look, they've won Time Travel LAN. It's over. It's been a hell of a journey. I don't know if we'll revisit this concept for other things in future. Like maybe we could do like an IGL edition, a Rifler edition, maybe a 1.6 edition, something like that, you know. But it's been an interesting thought exercise, and hopefully one that stands the test of time. So fans of the game, maybe in another 10 years when we're all playing virtual reality CSGO or whatever the fuck's going on, we'll look back and we'll sort of remember some of the legends of the game. And with that said, obviously, thanks to you, legends, all fantastic contributors in your own right down the years. Jason, Chad, Duncan, thank you so much. And that's it from Time Travel LAN. It's over. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.